If you have an unstable 13th or 14th gen Intel CPU, then they've finally updated us on the situation, on what is happening, and they've also admitted fault in a recent community forum post over at intel.com, where they talked about instability issues arising from overvolting. And this is a problem in itself because previously it said there was really no problem and they tried to shift the blame to motherboard manufacturers. Now they're saying that they've got an update coming sometime in mid-August, and if you have problems, then you should reach out to Intel customer support. But in today's video, we will look at these problems with the CPUs themselves, but we're also going to go beyond that and look at the financials, where I believe all these things are correlating together to give us an idea of what Intel's really doing here. And that is, I believe they are delaying the problem as much as possible, hoping it gets swept under the rug, and that way they can release their Core Ultra series and just hopefully everyone on the internet forgets about this. But I got news for Intel. People aren't going to forget about this, where their sales numbers already. If we look at the sales numbers currently worldwide for Intel CPUs, if we go over to America on Amazon's top 10 list, there's only one Intel CPU in the current top 10. If we go to Japan, that's traditionally been, I guess, a little bit more Intel bias in terms of CPU purchases for single end users. That's also got one Intel CPU in the top 10 selling list. And this is a scary trend that's taking place, where things like this can snowball very quickly for a company, where they can find themselves in hot water if they're losing business very quickly, on top of a lot of other things like a mass amount of debt. But let's talk about all this and more right after today's video sponsor. If you want to get rid of this annoying activate Windows message, then today's video sponsor SCD Keys has you covered for as little as $15 US. After you enter that coupon code BFTYC, you can cop yourself a legit single end user license today. Also works for Windows 11 Pro too. Links in description below. Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and let's look at this debt a little bit further in depth here. Here's where they've got over 50 billion currently in debt. Now, if we look at their assets and also their cash on hand, their cash on hand is over 20 billion. They're not going to go bankrupt tomorrow, but if we look at their assets on the balance sheet here, they've been increasing at a very aggressive rate. But also, if we look at some of their financial results in the past, they've done some real weird things, like changing the depreciation from 5 to 8 years. And so when we look at something like that, perhaps Intel could be overvaluing their assets in order to downplay the whole company's health as a whole. Because what's going on right now with Intel is a lot of hurt in the financial world. And this comes in the form of the most recent news from France and Italy, where Intel have announced that they're going to stop the investments in making new factories in these countries, but also in Israel, where they've got a $25 billion factory in construction right now. They've put the pause on this actual investment too. Then there's other news coming out. The factory in Arizona that apparently won't be producing chips until later next year, when it was slated to produce chips this year at 2024. Then there's Ohio, which is getting pulled back from 2025 to 2027. So when it comes to Intel, they seem like they're just missing all these different marks. And couple that in with the CPU problems that we're experiencing for end users, it seems like this is a company that is just in disarray right now. They don't know which way they're going, and they don't know how to deal with a lot of problems, as well as sticking to guidelines. So basically with Intel, since 2020, their debt's over doubled, but also their earnings, which is a very important piece of this business. That's how much they're actually making after all their expenses, etc., and taxes. That's dropped down drastically in the last year and a half, where we can see this going all the way down to under 2 billion now, where that was previously sitting over 10 and over 20 billion sometimes. So they were a healthy company a few years back. Now they're really struggling. And if we look at their revenue, this goes hand in hand with the revenue that's dropped off, especially since 2022, coupled in, of course, with higher inflation costs and a consumer that isn't as cashed up as they once were when the stimmy checks, for instance, were getting handed out en masse. So financially, this company is really starting to feel the pain. And we've relayed this back to the CPU problems that are being experienced right now. If this is indeed a mass recallable event for the CPUs in question, say 13th and 14th gen CPUs, I believe Intel will not simply be able to stomach the costs. It will just be too much to have these CPUs that have been manufactured, the cost that goes into the silicon, shipping, everything involved. It would just be an absolute nightmare for Intel, where the costs would go into the billions and possibly send Intel bankrupt. And I know you like Intel and bankrupt, those two words should not be going together, but I'm just seeing what I'm seeing on the financials here and just relaying it to you guys. Because what's happening with Intel right now is it seems like it's snowballing, where we've looked at those sales numbers just earlier in the intro, and we're seeing that they are abysmally bad. I've never seen them this bad. Even before the bulldozer era where Intel was on top, I never saw the sales this bad for AMD and their bulldozer chips, for instance, versus Intel. They were still selling pretty well. So this is speaking lengths to how bad of a situation Intel is in. For instance, back in the bulldozer days, AMD was still selling 2 out of every 10 CPUs in the top 10. So selling 1 in the top 10 is really bad numbers for Intel, to say the least. So if we're seeing this in the consumer side, one could only hazard a guess as to what you're seeing also in the other markets like business to business, where I think the trend will be even worse, where the business and data center definitely need stability, and that is at the top priority of their things that they require from a CPU in order to do business. Now back to the CPUs themselves, the 13th and 14th gen CPUs. What is exactly causing these CPUs to become faulty and unstable? Well, the issue here is that there's no concrete answer. In fact, to get the technology to analyze these CPUs at a nanoscopic level would be very expensive for any outlet to do it, especially an independent one like the ones you see on YouTube. So it will take, I believe, some time to get a concrete answer, but I was told over a year ago the problems with these CPUs span from the input-output hub. Gamers Nexus, however, believes it's an oxidation issue that's been plaguing these CPUs, and if that's the case, then there's pretty much going to be a 100% defect rate on the CPUs themselves, meaning that recall scenario could be a reality if that is indeed the problem. However, the weirdest thing is that Intel have kind of now admitted not just to the voltage issues, which we'll get onto soon, but also they've admitted that there was a problem with oxidation on these CPUs in 13th gen in 2023, and that issue was resolved. So kind of a bit weird how they're saying that there wasn't a problem, now there is a problem, and especially moving on to the voltage now, they're saying that there was a problem and now they're fixing it when they previously tried to pass the blame to motherboard manufacturers. And so these CPUs are really looking like they are becoming more sour and sour by the day, and that is, of course, when you're looking at the CPU as if it was a lemon. But going forward, what can we do as a community as a solution to all this? Well, at this point in time, I completely agree with what Gamers Nexus has been saying. Actually, I've been saying it for over a year now. I haven't been recommending 13th and 14th gen CPUs because I've actually tried 3 of them, 2 13900Ks and a 14900K. I've tried to use them as daily drivers, and I've come into the same issues on all 3 CPUs when I've tried to use them. And that is just sometimes out of the blue, the CPU just becomes extremely sluggish and just unusable, where I never got this experience on previous CPUs. Hence why I'm back on a 10th gen CPU at this point in time. Though at this point in time, if you do have a 13th or 14th gen CPU and you are coming into problems, say games are crashing or you're getting just say a random blue screen or things are really sluggish, it's actually kind of hard to prove that it's the CPU itself. You've got to then isolate it and put in another CPU, and if everything works fine, then you pretty much know it's the CPU. But the average user really doesn't have the time or patience or even knowledge to troubleshoot those kinds of issues. And so this creates the whole headache where the CPUs generally should have a failure rate of less than 0.1%. That's that back to the standard deviation models when it comes to making these CPUs. There's pretty much no room for margin of error when it comes to getting the CPU right. It's essentially the brain of the whole system. And when that's defective, well, then it's extremely hard to diagnose if that's the exact problem or not. So the headaches that amount from the possibilities of these CPUs being defective, I just simply cannot recommend them at this point in time. Now, if you're thinking the laptop CPUs are safe and they're okay, the 13th and 14th gen laptops, there are reports coming out now of instability issues on those 13th and 14th gen laptops as well. So up until this point in time, I think the issue has taken a while to come out into the light, because a lot of individual users, if they get an occasional crash or something's wrong, they'll probably just put it down to a bug and keep going on with their life. And then when businesses have a few faulty systems, they probably just put it down to bad luck. But then over time, people switch things out, change things, and they realize, yeah, that 13th or 14th gen CPU was the problem. Though in closing, I just simply cannot recommend going forward a 13th or 14th gen CPU. And also for me, you may have noticed in my used PC parts hunts, one's coming up very soon, I haven't been buying any 13th or 14th gen CPUs. So that of course was just with my personal experience with the chips themselves, but I'm glad to see that the truth sooner or later does come into the light, and that's exactly what's happening with this whole Intel situation. But furthermore, I think the goodwill and the reputation of Intel is really tarnished after this whole event, right? If you're going to buy an Ultra CPU, you're now probably casting doubts on whether that CPU is going to be the best choice for your system, especially if there's potential headaches that await for you. And I think if this is the case, and what we're seeing now with 13th and 14th gen, the delays and the non-admittance of problems, I think that's causing a lot of people to get cold feet, myself included, where I'm giving people an update on this situation where it's really bad. If you've got a problem, you fix it straight away. That's like me selling someone a PC and then they say they've got a problem, and then I'm like, yeah, just wait, mate. Nah, I'll fix it in a couple of months for you. And then eventually the warranty runs out and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Sorry, you're out of warranty, mate. I can't help you. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what I'm seeing here from Intel. They're just deflecting. Though on the other side of the shoe, AMD have announced that they are delaying the launch of the 9950X and other Ryzen 9000 CPUs just so they can get everything right from the get-go. I guess while the spotlight's on Intel, they don't want any crashing or problems occurring on the launch of their new CPUs. Though finally, I will say, I think there's a case here for what we're seeing with CPUs and how these problems are played out. Over the long run, we've seen the sort of step away from manually overclocking, where there used to be a lot of headroom on the table, to now these CPUs being way too aggressive out of the box, having virtually no headroom for overclocking. The voltages are really high, the temps are really high, and it's just created a situation where if that wasn't the case and the CPUs were much more conservative with their speeds and their voltages, then you could put it down to, okay, it's simply a faulty CPU, rather than saying, well, is the CPU faulty or are the voltages too high? It's sort of created this extra layer of ambiguity that is really just making it so it's just one big cluster when it comes to these CPUs. And going forward, Intel, as we've seen with the financials, they cannot afford any more mistakes. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I do look forward to seeing how Intel fix this, and I hope they fix it very soon. But if I do see the other option, which I'm very skeptical and I do think is taking place, and that is just the deflection and the delaying of actually getting to the problem, then I do think in turn you will see a company that's going to be having a lot of financial woes in the next couple of years. Anyhow, guys, hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, then be sure to drop us a comment down below. And if you stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, then you know what to do. And I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.